You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with this week's episode, a quick note from all of us here at the Hazard Ground. We sincerely hope that you are healthy and safe and secure. We know these are very trying times across the country right now as we're all dealing with this coronavirus and all of the sort of new norms that we're learning to live with every single day. But we sincerely hope that you are taking care of yourselves, your family, your loved ones, and everybody around you, and that you are doing everything in your power to stay safe and healthy and do the same for others. As usual, our reminders about growing our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube subscribers. Make sure you're with us on all the social media platforms to keep updated on the show and everything that's going on. And since we're all sort of self-quarantining here, it's a great opportunity to catch up on some of those previous episodes of the Hazard Ground. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, scroll through our entire guest list. There are so many amazing stories that you probably haven't heard yet. Some you may know, but even at that, the vantage point of each of our guests and their own personal touch and their own personal sort of viewpoint on each of these stories makes them incredibly unique. So take a look through all of our guests and find some previous episodes you haven't heard yet and go back and listen to them. It'll certainly be worth your while. If you want to kill some more time while you're self-quarantining, take a look at our book list. You'll see all the books written by our guests on the Hazard Ground. These are some amazing writers and some amazing people who have truly crafted both personal stories, fiction, nonfiction stories that absolutely help tell the story of who they are and what they are about. Finally, our promotion with Amazon is still ongoing. Go to hazardground.com. That's our website. Click on the Amazon banner at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. Do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you spend, and we'll get that donated right back to some of the amazing charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Again, please stay safe, stay healthy, take care of your loved ones, and continue to be part of the Hazard Ground community. Now on to this week's guest. Joining us this week on the podcast is a very unique guest, as he actually was in the NFL before he ever enlisted in the Marine Corps. That's right. He went to Arizona State and was drafted in the second round of the NFL draft by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And after spending part of 4 seasons playing in the NFL, he decided to enlist in the United States Marine Corps, where he spent nearly 4 years, including 1 deployment to Iraq, and he's now running for Congress in California. He is Jeremy Staat, joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Jeremy, welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Great state of California is your next sort of mountain to climb. Before we get to how and why you're running for office, we always kind of start where guys got into the military, but I'm curious, I want to start back at your football career because that sort of led to the reasons why you joined the military, correct?
Well, yeah, the amazing thing about my story is a lot of people don't realize it or don't know is that I'm actually a 3rd-generation veteran. My grandfather fought in the Navy in World War II. My father fought in Vietnam in the Army. My father was actually a field medic. And I've always had that desire to serve, but I never really had an opportunity due to sports. And so when the opportunity arose back in 2005, after I'd retired out of the NFL, I decided, you know what, I'm 29 years old. I'm in still somewhat decent shape. You know what, I better do this now, because if not now, then when? And so I decided to answer that calling and join the Marine Corps in 2005 when I was 29 years old.
Well, let me fill in some background for everybody else. While you were a football player at Arizona State, you had a very notable and popular roommate.
Well, absolutely. Well, my roommate was actually Kevin Tillman.
Okay,
Kevin
that's
Tillman
right,
was
Kevin.
Pat's brother. But yeah, Pat Tillman and I played at Arizona State. And, one thing that a lot of people don't realize about Pat is that Pat, was not a Bible-thumping Republican. He was more along the lines of a progressive atheist. But Pat and I had a great friendship, a great kinship. We had a mutual respect for one another, even though I was a devout Christian and didn't always live the way of a devout Christian. But, we would have our very in-depth conversations. But we were able to have, really deep conversations, heated conversations, but at the end of the day, we still had mutual respect for one another and friendship. And then, during our time at ASU, going into the 98 draft, Pat was what they called a tweener. He was between positions. So he wasn't big enough to play inside linebacker. They said he wasn't fast enough to be a DB. And so he was kind of a tweener. And so, even from an agent standpoint, he wasn't getting highly recruited as I was. I mean, I was a very high, recruited player coming out of college. And my agent, Frank Bauer, I used to remember telling Frank, going, "Hey, man, no one's talking to Pat. No one's wanting to sign him, da-da-da-da. Would you go talk to him?" And he said, "Well, that's because he's a tweener." Well, long story short, Frank Bauer, who was my agent, actually went over and signed Pat to his underneath his wings, if you will. And so Pat and I actually had the same agent as well when we were drafted into the NFL. So, I mean, we're kind of, it's kind of funny how our stories are intertwined, because after 9/11, I wanted to leave. I had just gotten released from the Seattle Seahawks. That was the first time in my playing career that I've ever been released from a football team. I was always highly sought after by the teams that I played on. And so that was kind of a blow to me. And so after getting released in 2001 from Seattle, 9/11 happened. And I completely decided then that I wanted to go do something more than just play a football game. I wanted to go be more. I didn't want to just be characterized as a football player. And so that's when I started looking into military service. And that's when Pat, via Frank, called me and said, "Hey, Frank says, you don't want to play anymore. You don't want to look at any contracts. You don't want to work out for any teams. What's going on?" I said, "Man, we just got attacked 9/11. I want to go do something bigger than myself. I want to serve others besides myself. And, I'm kind of tired of, the political BS that goes on in the NFL." And for about 2 hours, Pat and I had this conversation back and forth, heated at times. And I finally made a promise to him. I said, "All right, Pat, you know what? I'll go back in the NFL. I'll get my final season. And then after that, I'm going to go do whatever the hell I want." And Pat said, "That's great. Just do that for me. And, everything's hunky-dory, if you will." But then it was in 2002 when I signed with the Oakland Raiders that I had actually gone to Pat and Marie's wedding there in Pleasanton. And it was funny because then Frank came to me and said, "Hey, Patty's got this contract on the table. He won't sign it. It's a $3.6 million contract with the Cardinals, but he won't sign it. Would you go over there and talk to him?" And so this is at Pat and Marie's reception. And I walked to Pat. "Hey, man, congratulations. Awesome job. Marie looks awesome. You look horrible." Kind of things like that. And then I said, "Well, hey, Frank's bugging me. He says you got this contract that you won't sign." He goes, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I've got, some other things going on. Let's not talk about that right now. We're at my wedding." And I was like, "Oh, okay, no big deal." And so we cheers the Guinness and, went on our way. And then, next thing I know, him and Marie go to Bora Bora. And then when he came back, it broke all over the news that Pat and Kevin had joined the Army to become Army Rangers.
Incredible. I don't know if you've seen your Wikipedia page, but, and I only bring this up just because it's a moment of comedic levity, if you will. But it was described at ASU, and I'm reading this directly, quote, "Staat and Tillman drank and partied hard during their college careers."
Well, yeah, it was a number two party. It was a number 2 party school in the nation. And we were just coming off a national championship, debut, about, if you will. We just played against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, and so, Arizona State was a school to be. And, in the 90s, it was a great school. I mean, you had everything: beautiful weather, beautiful women. We had a winning program at the time.
Yep.
We were doing some great things. And so Pat and I did a lot of things together. I was there when, different things had happened. And, we were basically kind of, our consultants for one another, just trying to get through that time. And, I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to spend those 2 years with him. When I first met him, I didn't think much of him. I remember we had our first team meeting. We're all in a team meeting, and Pat came in, and everybody in the room just started going crazy. And they're like, oh, and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And they're like, that's Pat Tillman. I said, okay, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal was that, he usually he had long hair, and for whatever reason, he decided to shave it all off. And so he shaved it all off. And that was the first that the team had seen him without any hair. And so I just remember he came in and he just starts laughing, sits down in his chair and kicks up his feet and throws up the bird, basically F you there, buddy, like what's going on? But that was Pat, and that's who he was. And, it's very, I still talk to his brothers, and, I love talking to them because they're a lot like him.
Sure,
they don't have the laugh and the same mannerisms and stuff like that, and it's different because it's like sometimes I don't know if I can talk as deep with them as I did with Pat, but, they've been very, very open to what I'm doing. I said, hey, when I run for this, I don't want to use Pat as a political ploy. I want to let people know that he's not a Bible thumping Republican. Talking with Kevin the other day, he said the same thing. Kevin just said, I'm just kind of a hippie progressive, and I said, I appreciate it, and we had a conversation, gave each other hugs. I told him I loved them and went on our way. So, just great people, great people.
Absolutely. And again, I don't want to spend too much more time on Pat because this is your story, but there's so many layers to Pat, right? I've done my fair share of reading about him in his life, and I've talked to people who have known him. I can add you now to the list, but one of the things that made Pat was his curiosity about other people, his genuine passion to learn what other people's likes and dislikes were. And that kind of just not necessarily molded who he was, Jeremy, but in a sense, he took in that information, processed it, and sort of just used it to whatever he needed it to do and discarded the rest of it, correct?
Oh, absolutely. But he still had mutual respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the great thing about him is that, and I see that we need more of that in our world today, especially
Absolutely.
in politics, is like, hey, we can agree to disagree, but, we don't have to sit there and try to destroy people because of, one's belief or not a belief. But it's amazing. And that's kind of one of the reasons, I started this trail, if you will, down this campaign trail, was that, when I found out that, the Congress, as it sits right now, less than 22% of Congress members are veterans. And I'm thinking, what? That's part of the problem with these people. They've never learned to have to work with one another and actually gain, a goal. Whereas, in team sports, football, Marine Corps, Army, any of these times as team sports, you can have all kinds of people from different, nationalities, cultures, if you will, backgrounds, and political ideologies, but yet they can still come together on one common goal. And that's one thing I don't see with this Congress and the way things are going. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've had people that have been sitting in these seats for 40 years.
Agreed. I've said it forever. They need term limits. Some of these people should have been out of office years ago.
Absolutely. It's funny because it's like, love or hate President Trump, he's doing his best job that he knows how. Same thing with President Obama when he was in there, back and forth they went. But the thing about it is that it crushes me, or not crushes me, it just really infuriates me, is that you have these other politicians who have been in there 40, 50 years, and they're sitting there pointing the finger at one man who's been in office for, 3.5 years. They're saying this is all his fault. He's the reason for this. And it's like, wait a minute.
You've been here for 40 years. What have you done?
Yeah, you've been sitting there for 40 years stinking up the place, and now you want to blame one man because you can't control what he's doing because he's not affiliated with either one of your parties? It's like, come on.
No, listen, very well said. I've said it for a long time. I agree 100%. I think the garden needs to be turned over in politics. I think they need a hell of a lot more young people in there, and I would agree as somebody who at some point has designs on running for office, we need more veterans because those are the people who really understand leadership, and that's the biggest void. We'll get more into politics later, but that's the biggest void I see is that I don't see a lot of leaders. There may be a lot of politicians in there, but I don't see a lot of leaders. And to that end, I think when everybody goes to the poll, they should vote for leadership first because everything else after that is negotiable and can be navigated, right? If you have the proper leadership.
Well, absolutely. And the big thing, too, is that, the funny thing is they talk about this quid pro quo. That's all politics is.
Yes.
Half these guys that are claimed to be leaders, all they're doing is they're just finding little political pawns that they need. They put a bunch of money into these people. They get them elected. And then it's like, okay, remember when I got you elected? Now I need you to do this or I need you to do that. It's like that's the American politics. And the further and further I get down this thing, I've come to realize that, men and women of honorable character and integrity have no place in American politics. And it's absolutely sad.
All right, let's shift gears here for a minute because I do want to go back to the decision for you to enlist in the Marine Corps. I do think it's worth noting that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I did this in my research, but one of the reasons that you initially didn't go, Pat had convinced you to stay for another year to go get your NFL pension, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So what happens is, well, this and via Frank, you have to have 4 credited seasons, and in order to get a credited season, you have to have 3 games within a season on the active roster. So you need to have 3 active games to get a credited season, and you need 4 credited seasons, which I believe that's changed. I think now they changed it down to 3, but at that time it was 4 credited seasons.
Okay, and so you went back for that final year just to go get that pension. Because again, and for those that don't understand how the NFL works, that's being part of that community after the fact is massive. It's health benefits, it's entrance in this special club, so to speak. But there's a lot that comes with that pension that's super important. So 2020 hindsight vision, it was the right thing for you to do.
Absolutely, because I believe God has the control over everything, and timing was everything. The thing that's crazy about it is that when I signed back on in the NFL in 2002 with Oakland, I actually switched sides. I actually went from the defensive side of the ball to the offensive side of the ball, and there were some political things that happened there. So I signed on with the Oakland Raiders in 2002. I sign as an offensive guard because Bill Callahan at the time was the offensive coordinator and the D-line coach. And he said, with your speed and your strength, you're going to be a pulling guard in my offensive scheme. And in 2 years, you're going to be a Pro Bowler. And I'm like, okay, if I got this guy behind me, absolutely. Well, that just happened to be the season and it's the first time in NFL history, and it hasn't happened since, that an NFL head coach got traded for $8 million in a first-round draft pick, and that was Gruden. Yep. So Gruden gets traded to Tampa. He goes to Tampa. Bill Callahan gets the nod to be the head coach. Well, at that moment, I should say, things changed for me because all of a sudden I was taking reps. I was getting in there, and all of a sudden, as soon as Bill Callahan got the head coaching job, he essentially told me, quote, unquote, that he had bigger fish to fry and that he was going to cut me in August. And so I'm like, wow, appreciate it. I already knew then that I was going to be an unrestricted free agent offensive guard with no playing experience. So I knew I was going to have to sit out that season. So I sat out the whole 2000, waiting for the phone call, never got it. So then 2003, I signed on with the St. Louis Rams as a defensive tackle. And this is what's crazy because when I left Pittsburgh, the problem with what happened in Pittsburgh is it got political once again, that Bill Cowher and Tom Donahoe was the general manager. Bill Cowher was the head coach. They hated each other's guts. I was a Tom Donahoe draft pick. And so after my rookie season, I was getting a whole bunch of playing time. After my rookie season, all of a sudden Tom Donahoe, and this, of course, I don't know any of this is going on behind the scenes, but Tom Donahoe and Bill Cowher go into Mr. Rooney's office and basically said, I can't work with him. Something's got to change. And at that time, Mr. Rooney said, okay, well, it's easier to hire a GM than a head coach, and fired Tom Donahoe. Well, at that point, it was, my playing days with the Steelers were done.
Sure,
because Bill Cowher wasn't going to have a Tom Donahoe draft pick, playing out there, basically showing that Tom Donahoe or whatever knew what he was talking about. So essentially for 2 years, I just had to grind it out with the Steelers before becoming a free agent. But unfortunately, the NFL is a very small brotherhood. And so when I told Bill Cowher that I didn't want him to re-sign me and that I didn't want to play in the Steelers anymore and sign on with the Seattle Seahawks, it just happened to be that the defensive coordinator, and I forget his name, who was at the Steelers, his brother was the player personnel guy at the Seattle Seahawks.
Oh my God.
So essentially I'm walking into basically a viper's den, not realizing who's who in the zoo. And so I get to Seattle and basically wasn't going to have a shot there either because of being blackballed or blacklisted from the Steelers with the Seattle Seahawks. But what's crazy about it is that when I go back, so let's fast forward to 2003, my agent, Frank Bauer, is beside himself. He's like, how do you get a guy who's 6'6", 300 pounds, running a 4.9 40, who was the Pac-10 defensive lineman of the year, all this kind of garbage. How does he not get signed with a team? And so he goes back and talks with Bill Cowher. And Bill Cowher says, Jeremy's a great athlete. He's this, he's that. He should be playing on the defensive side of the ball, blah, 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 blah. He needs to be a defensive tackle. So then Frank starts pushing me to the St. Louis Rams as a defensive tackle. And lo and behold, they signed me in 2003. I make it through training camp. Everything's going really well. And the Rams decided to draft a first round pick and Jimmy, I forget his last name, but he was a first rounder. He was a defensive tackle. So they put all this money in a first round draft pick. Well, the writing was on the wall. They're not going to keep me on board because of what I was making, my salary at the time. And so I got released in 2003. And then about 2 months into the season, the St. Louis Rams are so banged up on defense that they brought me back in. I got my 4 games and basically called it a career.
All right. And so then 2006 rolls around, and you join the Marine Corps. Now, I got to ask you played college football, you played NFL, you've played a lot of hot summer days, 2 days in the heat. What's harder, football training camp or Marine boot camp?
Those are two different those are basically two different, schemes, if you will. The NFL was different as far as the mindset. That's something I had been conditioned to do. The Marine Corps was mentally more exhausting on the fact that, here I'm 29 years old and I'm having to deal with 18, 19-year-old kids who some of them have never had to do anything other than just, pass their classes in high school. And they're dealing with, issues that I was kind of like, wow, that's not really an issue when you look at the big, scheme of things, in life. They're having problems with their girlfriends, they're having problems with their parents or whatever they might be. But the hardest part was going from a sprint mindset in the NFL to a long distance marathon journey, if you will, in boot camp, where it was just like it just continued to go. Where training camp in the NFL is when at my time it was 5 or 6 weeks, whereas boot camp was 13 weeks. Instead of running 110-yard striders, you're running a 3.5, 4 mile jog. So it was a little bit different. So mentally, it was more taxing, not so much physically in the Marine Corps over the NFL. And then, of course, being in the NFL, having the physical aspect as recovering from, football games and having to do that for 16, 17, 21 weeks or however long the season would be was a little bit different as well.
All right. After you graduate Marine boot camp, where do you go?
I went to Camp Pendleton for my infantry school of infantry training.
Okay.
Correct. But that was another thing, is that being in boot camp, was tough because, within 2 or 3 days, the word was out of my background. And of course, my experience in boot camp changed. As soon as I got into my platoon in boot camp, everything changed because all of a sudden people that normally don't visit platoons were visiting the platoon and bringing unwanted attention to myself. And of course, being on the parade deck or marching through MCRD, of course, I'd have other drill instructors going, hood, hike, or they'd grab me out of class. Or as I'm running to the head, they'd grab me out of class and say, hey, you stupid fuck, what are you doing here? You're going to give up your, the NFL. You want to die like your friend Pat Tillman. What's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. I'm like, this is not why I'm here, guys, but, appreciate it. But of course I couldn't say that. And so I just stood there and took it. But like I said, it was a little bit different experience for me on the basis of the life experiences I had before going into boot camp.
Okay, so when you get to your unit first, what's it like for you? Is it a culture shock? And it's funny because people make so many parallels between football and the military. When you first get to your unit, do you see those parallels? Do you feel like you're there, or are they over-exaggerated?
Oh, they're extremely over-exaggerated. The thing about it is I get to my unit, and they had just returned from Afghanistan. They had lost a few Marines in country. And, of course, the first thing that happens is I get with my unit, my platoon, and we have a company meeting, and the battalion commander pulls me up, in front of whatever it was, 300 Marines, and basically says, this guy here is a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps. He is not an NFL superstar, blah, 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 and he's not to be treated differently. It's like, oh my God, you just you're treating me differently. If you hadn't said anything, nobody would know who I am.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, it was pretty tough. Of course, they knew who I was before I got to the unit, and of course, they were trying to make an example out of me, which I wasn't trying to be made an example. I just wanted to serve. I wanted to be the best Marine I could be, but unfortunately, I was essentially overexposed due to my prior achievements in life, and so it was a little bit different.
Let me ask you, and again, I'm sorry to return to the Pat Tillman subject, but Pat had already been killed by the time that you had signed up, so everybody was aware that football players were signing up for the Marine Corps and everything else. And did anybody try to throw Pat's name around at you?
Oh, absolutely. They would
did
throw
it bother
things
you?
around. It did, because it wasn't why I was there. I was trying to blaze my own trail and do my own thing, but unfortunately, not unfortunately, but our lives are intertwined, and it's going to be that way for the rest of my life. No matter what I do, the Pat Tillman's going to be brought up, which is great. I want his legacy to live, but I have to tell people, and it's hard for me because I don't want to shut people down. But this campaign, and I've said this before, isn't about Pat Tillman. It's about me and what I'm trying to do with the rest of my life. And, it is really tough because it's going to be one of those things that's going to be brought up over and over and over as long as I live.
Okay, so you get to your first deployment when, and it's in Iraq, correct?
Correct. I only had one deployment. I was deployed to Haditha, Iraq in 2007. And so basically once we left for, 29 Palms for everything that we did, it was about a 9-month deployment, roughly about 7 months in Haditha, Iraq in 2007. So, that was quite an experience as well, going into that country and seeing the different culture and how things are run in that country. Overall, I was, exposed to a lot of different things. And I realized that, even people who have different ideologies and beliefs, a laugh is the same in any language, and that they're just people and they're trying to live and they're trying to do the best they can. And they're, essentially, just want to live. But, it was very eye-opening to see that the stark contrast between what the American news was saying and what was actually going on. And that's why a lot of times when I see news stories, I have to read, 3 or 4 different news stories on the same subject to really find where the truth is.
And for those who don't know, Haditha is probably about a 3-hour drive. It's maybe about 250 miles from Baghdad, northwest of Baghdad, towards western Iraq. So out past Ramadi for those who are not, familiar with the geography. That said, what's your day-to-day life like on your deployment? Like, how much contact are you in? You're just doing patrols? Give me kind of the background of that.
Yeah, the biggest thing is we had a Mustang captain. He was all about being out there on patrol. He didn't want us sitting on the fob and messing around or doing anything like that. He didn't want the internet or phones on the fob. That's how dedicated he was to the cause, because he wanted to bring everybody home. But essentially, we were on 4-hour on, 4-hour off patrol schedule, and we would rotate through as a machine gunner. As having a machine gunner platoon, we would have our weapons platoon. We would rotate through. We would go 4 hours on as a foot patrol, 4 hours on as a mounted patrol, and then we'd go 4 hours on as QRF. But the thing that's crazy about it is that schedule never worked out that way. So
right.
you might go out for a 4-hour foot patrol, then we would find an IED. Well, then we're sitting on that IED, set up security for 10 or 12 hours waiting for EOD to come in and disband that IED. So our patrol schedule was basically out as much as possible during that time. We found probably a half dozen or more IEDs. We hit one IED during what we call desert denial. Essentially, one of our vehicles, decided to go outside the 7-ton tracks and hit a pressure plate IED, which essentially blew the Humvee in half. Luckily, nobody was killed. One guy lost a finger and took some shrapnel to his butt. And then John Banta, busted his face up when he hit his face on the butt of his 240. But other than that, he had 2 plates and 7 pins stuck in his face.
Oh, man.
But other than that, we were actually the only at that time, we were the first infantry battalion to bring everybody home, minus a finger.
Wow. So in your experience there, do you feel like almost you were sold short? I know it sounds crazy to say, but like you signed up for this love of country and desire to go fight and go get bad guys, and nothing really happens to you. Were you disappointed by that?
I was, because I was expecting something else, but that's life. And unfortunately in the media and Hollywood, they're trying to sell something more than what it really is.
Yeah.
And, I felt there was a letdown. I'm thinking I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here. And as soon as we get off the bird, we're going to be in contact, because that's what it seems like on the news every day. There's contact left and right, And when I took a step back and looked at the overall scenery, if you will, I realized that, the war in Iraq is not even comparable to the war in Vietnam or in World War II. Some of the things that our veterans saw before us in Iraq and Afghanistan were completely different parallels, if you will, as far as the grotesque stuff that happened. But I was just really let down. I felt let down because I wanted to believe so hard in what we were doing and what was going to change, that now that I look back, I think, man, nothing's really changed in that country.
Yeah.
They're still going to do what they want to do, and being, young and dumb and thinking that we could change the world. I look back and I go, man, these people have been killing each other since the dawn of man.
Yep.
And we think that we're going to go in there and here's America, and we're going to give you our democracy and our constitution, and you're just going to change overnight. And unfortunately, that's probably never going to happen.
Well, and look, and people never understood this from the beginning. And when Iraq broke out, and even Afghanistan, it doesn't even matter, either one. You're not going to change 2,000 years of thinking in 18 months or 3 years or 5 years. It's just you're working on such a steep slope that it's never going to get there. To that end also, the thing that separates America from everybody else is our desire to be unified, or at least the beginning of our country, their desire to be unified, their desire to walk away from something. You could even see it now. With current events and everything else, and as we sit here in the middle of January recording this, things that are going on in Iran, you have people protesting in the streets, but not everybody feels like, the people protesting are right. What built our country was this unifying belief that we deserved freedom from England, and from there, it all went forward. So until you can find that unifying belief in the Middle East, which due to tribalism and, again, hundreds of years of thought and everything else, it's nearly impossible to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. At what time is it going to change? For me as a believer, I know what I think is going to change it, but, changing the heart of man to believe in one ideology, if you will, is the only way it's going to happen, because at the end of the day, everybody's going to have their opinion. Everybody's going to say what they want to say. And at the end of the day, who's right? What guidelines are we basing everything? I was reading some stuff the other day about, God and Allah, and how, Islam and Christianity is the same thing. It's like, whoa, the same God. And it's kind of like, that's okay.
You just make me laugh, because I remember having this conversation with my interpreter in Iraq, and we got along really well. We were able to joke with each other. And again, all this is in jest. Every time I would have a meeting with my Iraqis, he would tell me, they would say, inshallah, obviously, which means if God wills it. And he would look at me, and one day he said that to me, and I said to him, which God are you talking about, your God or my God? And he looked at me and said, sir, there is only one God. I said, no. There's your God and there's my God. I know that for a fact. And I was breaking his stones the whole time, but when you said it, it just made me laugh that we argued for 10 minutes. I was like, nope, there's your God and my God. Trust me, they're different.
Oh, yeah. I had the same. I have one of the same stories. I was sitting there on the streets of Haditha. I'm walking down. We had some IPs, Iraqi police officers with us, and we're sitting there talking. And literally, I wish there was a picture of it, but I've got my M16 and his AK-47. We're muzzle to muzzle. We're just slung down, and they're muzzle to muzzle, and we're just talking outside of this Iraqi's house. We were doing some security for the mayor or something, and we start rapping about it. We start talking about ideologies. And basically what he said, the same thing. He came down to, well, Allah and God are the same. The only difference is that we don't believe that Jesus Christ is a savior man. We believe he was a prophet. And we believe Muhammad, was our guy. And it's like, okay, great. So we agreed to disagree. No shots were fired. We agreed to disagree. I have to be honest, when I started walking away, I'm like, is this son of a bitch going to shoot me in the back? But it didn't happen. But once again, we have to be real and have these conversations. And that's the one thing that I see, is really wrong with our society today is that, people are so offended by everything that we can't even have constructive conversations with anybody without somebody getting upset and being offended, even if the facts and the truth of the matter are on the table.
So that deployment ends, you get back home. What's next for you as far as the Marines are concerned?
But I come back, we get back, and of course we get by any Marine standards, when you get back from deployment, what do? You go out and you party a bunch, and you're thankful God that you're back in country, and essentially I was out with some of my Marines, and we're out having a good time, and I wind up going into atrial fibrillation. I wake up, we're getting ready, we're doing our workup for Afghanistan. We're at the Shot X, basically getting ready to get all our shots for Afghanistan. And we're sitting in line, and all of a sudden, I feel like crap. I'm like sick, got a stomach bug. So I kind of get out of the line, throw up. And next thing you know, I check my pulse. I'm like, what the heck? I'm dizzy. My pulse is out of control. I'm like, Corman up. And he checks my pulse. He's like, holy crap, dude, you're like 190 over something. I'm like, what? And like, yeah, your pulse is out. Come on, boom. So they throw me down, in the not the mess hall, but the one of the appointment rooms there, and they start hooking me up to EKG. They're throwing bare aspirin down my throat. I'm like, what the hell is going on? They're like, we think you're having a heart attack. I'm like, heart attack? Are you out of your mind? I'm 32 years old. What are you talking about? And so long story short, I went to atrial fibrillation. They had the DC convert my heart, basically stop it to get it to beat in a correct rhythm. And then from there, they essentially did a full workup on me. It took whatever it was, a year. And then I got a discharge, or it's kind of right now, it's in between. I'm not for sure exactly what it was. Was it a medical discharge or was it medically retired? They're still fighting it out in the VA here 12 years later or whatever it is. Wow. But yeah, so essentially that's what it came down to. And they're like, well, of course the Navy doctors were like, oh, you're fine. Go back. You're going to go to Afghanistan. If and when you go into AFib again, just make sure you get to the ER. And I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, first off, I'm going to
not an ER in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I'm going to Afghanistan. And I said, if this is an issue, the problem I have is I'm not trying to be some badass. I said, because if I go down at 6'6", 270 pounds, and I'm on the side of a mountain, I'm not going to put 14 other Marines' lives in danger because my fat ass goes down. I said, we need to figure out what's wrong with this. We need to get it fixed. And of course, they went through and decided, okay, well, you know what, you're too banged up to be a Marine anymore. And basically, kicked me out the door.
Do you think football had anything to do with that issue?
Oh yeah, I'm sure football and, carrying a 125-pound rucksack up and down mountains, jumping over fences and stuff of that nature has something to do with it as well. But actually, the biggest thing was being in Iraq, sitting on that damn battle saddle, that little leather strap and a gun turret, going through the desert at 75 miles an hour, hitting some big ass wallies. That's what really hurt.
Yeah.
That jacked my back up for sure. Because there's no give in that seat. But, at the end of the day, I'm glad I had the experience. I'm glad it's over with. I got out in 2009. I moved back home to my hometown of Bakersfield, California. I married my wife, Janelle, and we have two amazing young boys. And, I decided that I wanted to continue to serve. I couldn't serve on the front lines anymore, but I wanted to continue to serve. And so that's when I started my own foundation, the Jeremy Staat Foundation. And what I would do is go out and help troubled youth and veterans essentially find their way, find trades. I'm a big believer in the trade skills. I grew up laying concrete, digging ditches, running electrical, doing landscape design and stuff of this nature, carpentry. And I saw a huge need for that in our community. Mm-hmm. But I also, after getting out and doing some reading on, a huge epidemic that continues to plague our veteran community is the epidemic of veteran suicide. Yeah. And most people don't realize it, and I've been preaching this for almost 10 years now, is that, we've lost more veterans to suicide than we have in all the conflicts since World War II. And so I decided, something needs to be done about this. And the funny thing about it was back in 2012, it was a presidential year, I believe. And I was so annoyed with how much money was being spent on these campaigns. I mean, just spending, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do a national campaign to bring awareness to veteran suicide. And I'm going to do it for as little amount of money as possible. And so that's when I decided to ride a bicycle 3,468 miles across the country, raise an awareness about veteran suicide. And so I rode from the Wall of Valor in Bakersfield, California, and basically zigzagged my way across the southern part of the United States, all the way to the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And along the way, hit every single war memorial, military installation, veteran home, VA hospital, all the way across the country to see exactly the differences in, the hospitals and how veterans were treated. And it took me about 100 days. I'm glad I had the opportunity to see it.
Now, this is on a bicycle?
Bicycle, yeah, not a hog or a motorcycle.
Okay, when you said bike, I just wanted, for clarity's sake, I thought you meant bicycle, but, people have taken motorcycles long ways. That's insanity, bro.
Well, the thing about it is I believe that our veterans are worth it. And,
yes.
and my thing is this, even when I was in the NFL and even in the military, I've seen that we do a horrible job of taking care of those who have taken care of us. One thing I couldn't stand in the NFL is that, the players that had come before us weren't getting the benefits that the players are getting today. And it really annoyed me. I said, we're not taking care of the guys that got us to the dance floor. And it's the same thing with, when I say guys, it's guys and girls. But the thing about it is that I see the same thing now with our veterans. My father's been out of Vietnam for 50 years. He's been a part of the VA system for 12, and he's still fighting to get a better rating than 10%.
Yeah, I've told this story hundreds of times. It's just, I'm on VA disability. I can go back for more. I just don't feel like going through the process. It's too much of a pain in the ass. Like, I don't have the strength to go through it again. Whatever it is, what it is, I'll deal with it after the fact. But, I don't, unless there was an easier process, until I see an easier process, I'm not going to climb that mountain again. I did it once.
Well, and this is the problem. This is one of the reasons I'm running. Is like, what? I truly believe, and I'm sick and tired of all these politicians being treated like celebrities. They are servants of the people. Why are they getting better treatment than our veterans? And I really believe this. If we really want to change the system and the leadership, we need to stop treating these politicians like celebrities. I believe that the politicians should get their health care through the VA system. They want socialized with Bernie and AOC and these other people out there that want socialized health care. Well, hey, we got it, baby. It's called the VA system. You know what? Drop your insurance coverage, come to the VA system. Because I can guarantee you, if old Bernie had to go through the VA system for that little heart attack he had a couple months back, he wouldn't be with us today.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely.
And, and the other thing, too, is, what? They should get their freaking retirement through Social Security. Why are they getting this high-end, retirement? Why don't they get their retirement through Social Security? I also believe that their war chest, the quote-unquote war chest, all the monies that they raise, that they sit around and have in the little bank account, that money should be donated back to Social Security as well. Why do they get to walk away with it?
You're not going to get an argument from me. That's, this is obviously divulging some personal and political opinions. I don't disagree with anything that you're saying on its premise, but it's one of those things where there certainly is a civil-military divide, right? There is an imbalance in the relationship between how our military is treated, what they do, what they're asked to do, and what their benefits are on the other side. I think that part is clear. So let me ask you, you mentioned earlier that you got cut from a football team when the Steelers let you go. It was the first time you'd ever been cut. And then you'd also been discharged from the Marine Corps for medical reasons. Was either one of those tougher than the other when you put the two side by side? Was either one more deflating to your ego? That all of a sudden, and I ask for the Marines because all of a sudden this massive football player, his body broke down and betrayed him, and he couldn't do it anymore. Like, compare the two.
To me, they're kind of one of the same when it comes down to pride. Because I don't go into anything just, trying to do it half-ass. And for me, I gave everything I had in the NFL. And it was just like, okay, you don't want me anymore because you and this other guy have a problem, or the numbers don't work out, so we're not going to keep you. It's kind of like, okay, but can you deny that I'm a better player well, we can't deny that you're a better player than this, but because your salary is at whatever it is, $250,000, and his salary is at $185, we're going to go ahead and keep him because of numbers.
Sure.
Okay. And then, in the Marine Corps it was a little bit different because for me, I was 33 years old, which at that time, that's
kind of old by Marine terms.
Yeah. In the Marine Corps standard, you're an old man. You're ancient. You should be some, E8 or E9.
Well, at that point, most Marines who enlisted have been doing it for 15 years.
Absolutely. So I was, behind the 8 ball on that as well. I mean, I would love to have gone, but then, when I have to look at it realistically and say, okay, you're an E4, you just got non-rec for E5 because the first sergeant didn't like you because he said you were a fat body because you weren't in regs. It was like, okay, first sergeant, I haven't been in regs since I got in the Marine Corps. See, I had to sign 3 waivers: an age waiver, a height waiver, and a weight waiver. So it's like, okay. So, it was difficult to hear that being said. And I just finally said, I'm 33 years old. I've got to kind of look at my life after the NFL and the Marine Corps, because essentially I've had to start my life over about 4 different times. I've been essentially bankrupt probably 3 or 4 times in my life, and I've had to figure out how to circumnavigate all the different obstacles in life. So coming out of the NFL, because there was a time period, there's about 2 years between 2000 and 2003 where I didn't get a paycheck. I made very little money in the NFL for 2 years because of the fact that I wasn't on the team, because the only time you get paid in the NFL is if you're on the active roster. So I could have signed a $10 million deal, but if I'm not on the active roster, I don't get paid that money. And so for 2 years, I didn't get a paycheck, but yet I had, NFL bills that I had to be paid. And so essentially my last year in the NFL in 2003, I was essentially, almost bankrupt because of all the money. I lost money in the stock market. I lost money, just being an NFL football player, going out and partying and doing what I did. But so I had to restart over. Same thing in the Marine Corps. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I remember signing up. I was getting ready to get married, and coming out of the Marine Corps, I wanted to buy a house, because I was going to get married, but I couldn't qualify for a VA loan because I didn't have a job. And I'm like, wait a minute, I just spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. And they're like, well, sorry, if you don't have the credit and the income, we can't give you a loan. And so I was like, wow, so I had to learn, to kind of navigate those obstacles to become successful again. And it's really tough, especially for a lot of young Marines that are coming out thinking, man, I just put my life on the line for this country. Where's my free house? Where is my car? I'm entitled to these things, but unfortunately we're not. And so that's what's really difficult for me when I see a lot of these different organizations that are giving houses away to, veterans who are already 100% disabled and not taking care of the other ones because their service is somewhat less desirable because, they didn't get blown up or they're not missing a limb or something of this nature, And so it was really difficult to overcome those obstacles as well, because it's like, wow, okay, well, I got to figure this out on my own again. And so I had to deal with that on both levels, in the NFL and in the Marine Corps.
So in all this time, obviously you're kind of figuring out what's next in life, and it's hard to cover a 10-year period between 2009 and 2019 when you make your announcement that you're going to run for Congress in California, but kind of give me the background of the whole thing. I know you've touched on a little bit that you were kind of sick and tired of the establishment and seeing where it is, but what were you doing in the meantime? Were you just working a regular job? And how do you get to the point where you're at where you're saying, look, I'm going to go all in and run for Congress?
Well, essentially what's happened is after my bicycle ride in 2012, my wife and I decided to have a family. And so I really decided that I was going to prioritize my family over the needs of others, because I was so overwhelmed. I mean, if you want to be overwhelmed, if you want to make sure that you're not bored at any time, start serving your community. I mean, there is so much need in the community, whether it's with veterans, homelessness, with kids, with, whatever it is. And so through the foundation that I ran for almost 2.5 years, I was just overwhelmed. I was tired. I was on the road 6 days out of the week. And I just basically said, you know what? I can't lose my family trying to save the world. And so I got to make a choice. And so what I decided to do was basically back out of the public limelight, if you will, work on, focus on my family. I went back to school, and since 2012, I believe it is, or 2013, I've earned a master's degree in educational leadership. I've earned an EDS degree in educational leadership, and I'm a dissertation away from my doctoral degree in educational leadership. And I decided that about 6 years ago that I wanted to do more in the community as far as teaching trade skills. I wanted to start my own welding academy. But as I went through the process to start this academy, I wound up taking a job at Bakersfield Junior College teaching welding to essentially the exact same crowd that I wanted to teach through my foundation. But now I don't have to worry about raising, $300,000 a year to keep the foundation running. So I essentially stepped back from the president of my foundation and just put that on hiatus. And I've been teaching welding for the last 6 years and absolutely love it. But I just felt like, you know what, there's something I need to do more. I need to do more. I'm sick and tired of seeing our veterans treated this way. I'm tired of seeing them being treated like political pawns only for politicians when they want a vote. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, and so essentially, going into this political run, it's been very eye-opening to see how deceptive and to see how self-righteous, a lot of you have to be in order to be a congressman.
Yeah.
Or any politician for that matter.
I think that the game that is politics is something that is part of just the constructs, the way it's played. I mean, similar to the NFL, right? I mean, you can have a style of play, but in reality, the rules dictate how you play. And I think there are certain things in Congress or certain things in politics that dictate how you play. It's about relationships. It's about getting to know people, getting them to know you, about being likable, all those things, shaking hands. And, that's all part of the game of Congress. But where I think that we lack is more in the integrity in the decision-making, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that to me is what reeks when I'm around political people and I talk to them and everything else, and I see the game from the outside looking in, and you could just tell that there is a certain amount of stench that doesn't mesh with the values that we learn in the military.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I actually just did just this past week, about a week and a half ago, I found out through my campaign, it was only by accident, but we have all the thing about this campaign, and it's all about money. Money is essentially equates to bullets. If you don't have enough money, you can't go out there and get the name recognition. You can't win the votes that you need. You can't build a relationship because what it comes down to at the end of the day, it's all about name recognition. But one of the things that I found out with my campaign is that they had, launched this email solicitation campaign. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. So, you've got 14 million emails, and this data comes from just basically our cell phones and being online. I mean, people can they can get anything they want from you online these days. I mean, it's scary how much information is just being thrown around out there about ourselves. And essentially, they use this database, and I thought this is really cool. Okay, they're going to blast this out. This email blast is going to go out to all these people, and these people are going to click on this link, and they're going to donate to my campaign. Wow, this is pretty cool. Well, come to find out, and I didn't authorize it, but 80% of what was being donated online was going to a third-party marketing company. Mm-hmm. And I said, wait a minute. I said, there needs to be a disclaimer on this email telling people that 80% of their money isn't going to the actual candidate. It's actually going to this third-party marketing company. I have a problem with that. And they said, well, this is what you do. We're essentially buying their information. Now we have their information. We're going to re-solicit them later and ask them for more money. And I go, what? I go, no. That's absolutely wrong. I said, that's deceptive and that's misleading. I said, that's not what we're going to do. Well, that's just the way the game's played. Ha, ha, ha. And I said, wait a minute, are you laughing at me? Why is it so funny? Why are you laughing? I said, this is wrong. This is deceptive. And so long story short, I wound up firing all my consultants because I'm like, you know what? I'd rather lose this race having my honor and integrity intact than winning it being deceptive to those who are trying to support me. Because if you were to give $1,000 to my campaign via this email and you found out that $800 of that went to some third-party marketing company, I mean, you'd be a little bit upset.
Sure.
And they, and I said, that's not what we're going to do. But there were some other things that happened. But these consultants, all they care about is money. And so they go, well, you know what? Yeah, so what? Just go raise more money. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to go raise more money. This is not being a good steward of people's money. I said, I don't agree with this. And so I made the decision, no, I'm firing you all. And I fired them all, basically 50 days from the March 3rd election.
Wow.
Because that's me. I'm a man of integrity, and I'm not going to play this quote-unquote political game by deceiving the people who are supporting me the most. And so if I don't raise the $1 million that I need, so be it. If I can win this thing with $100,000, then so be it. But I'm not going to sit there and play this political game, and I'm going to let the world know. Do not give money to email solicitation campaigns, especially if there's no disclaimer telling you where that money goes. I mean, maybe that's one of the first things I'm going to pass when I get in there.
Right.
You know what? All money should be disclosed where it's going, because I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And so, but that's the game. These politicians, and they see it as, we'll do anything by any means possible to win, even if I have to lie to the people who are supporting me. And I think there's something wrong with that.
Wow. All right. So where is your campaign right now? And again, for those who don't know, you're running for this seat in the 8th Congressional District. The guy who was there before you is retiring, so it's a open race. I assume you kind of enjoy the fact that it's an open race kind of deal, right?
Well, the biggest thing, the whole reason I got into this was because of what Duncan Hunter did in the 50. Duncan Hunter, for those of you who don't know, is a Marine who basically is going to jail for $300,000 worth of misappropriation of campaign funds, and then he's got 6 or 7 mistresses or whatever. But anyways, as a Marine, I'm going, gosh, dang it, you had the life, and you destroyed it, and you're putting a bad, basically a bad target on any other Marine who wants to run for Congress because of what you've done. And so I wanted to basically kind of bail him out and try to save face with the community when it comes to politics. So people right now are sick and tired of politics. They're sick and tired of politicians. They're sick and tired of the pettiness. They want real people in office who are actually going to represent their best interests. But as far as my campaign is right now, we're basically restarting. We're kicking it off again. We're getting ready to do a huge online fundraising campaign so that 100% of those funds go directly to the campaign so that I can actually purchase the things that I need to purchase in order to win this thing. As far as signs, billboards, and stuff of this nature, that's what it's all about, is getting the name recognition out there. And so I've actually got a great group of individuals who have jumped on board here that are going to really help me to get the name recognition out there. It's an open seat. Paul Cook, who is the incumbent, is a retired Marine Corps colonel. He's actually a Purple Heart recipient as well. He actually wanted to pass his seat on to another veteran because he knows that the percentage of veterans in Congress is extremely low.
Right.
But I'm an anti-establishment guy. I hate pipeline politicians. I actually despise politicians in general. But the only way to change the system is to get in there and actually, essentially shame them to realize that they're not, putting the best interest of the people first. They're putting themselves first. It's amazing to me how, when it comes to benefits or a raise or anything like that, they're all on board with each other. Oh yeah. But when it comes to like veteran issues or immigration, they'll sit there and have this dramatic fight for as long as it takes and then ask for re-election so they can continue the fight. To me, sometimes I don't even feel like they want to solve the problems. They want to just keep, letting it just continue to procrastinate on the issue so that they can sit there and fight in that same seat and just use that, that carrot out in front of their constituents saying, oh, they're going to keep fighting for me. They're going to keep fighting for me, but nothing ever gets done. But essentially, like I said, we're basically in the biggest fight in this political campaign that we can be in. We're really behind the 8 ball and just trying to get the awareness out there. And if I don't win, it's not a big deal because I know it's going to open up other opportunities for me down the road. Who knows? President Trump might see what's happening. If I don't win the primaries and get into the jungle election, into the general, he might say, you know what? I like this guy. I'm going to make him the head of the VA. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But unless we put ourselves out there and try to, change the system, we're never going to know what kind of opportunities are available to us unless we actually get out there and expose ourselves to what could potentially be, a great opportunity.
You said head of the VA, many have tried, more have failed in fixing the VA, and to include President Trump. And again, political affiliations aside, that was one of the things he ran on, that he was going to fix the VA. And to this day, 3.5 years later, we're still dealing with the same VA. Now, there's a lot of reasons why, and I'm not necessarily blaming the president for not fixing it, but my point simply is to say, when you say you want that job, I'll play the political game with you. Why can you do it different than everybody else?
Well, the biggest thing I see right now is that it's not the people within the VA system. The VA system right now is so impacted by the needs of our veterans. The VA doesn't have the resources. My thing is that we have to get the resources to the individuals that need it. I mean, I've sat with the doctors, I've sat with the RNs, I've sat with the individuals and talked to them saying, hey, what do you guys need? I've actually talked to these people. And some of these people are literally working overtime for free to try to just get caught up. They don't have the right resources. They don't have the funding. They don't have the buildings. Heck, here in Bakersfield, the VA outpatient hospital that's here in Bakersfield is such a crap hole that the people that, I literally feel that when I walk in there, I'm going to catch something coming out. It's just that bad of a building. And so essentially, if we can spend all this money on all of our allies and all these other people around the world, why can't we put American and veterans first? Why can't we get the VA the resources they need? The VA system should have been rebuilt 40 years ago after the Vietnam War. But nobody thought we were going to get into another war. Oh, we're not going to get in another war after Vietnam. Nothing's going to happen. Well, here we are, and we still have the same VA that was established, 40, 50 years ago that hasn't been essentially revamped or given the resources it needs to essentially take care of the people that we're putting in harm's way. So the biggest thing is getting them the resources.
You were quoted once as saying about, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, you can't just tell some Marine who just lost his buddy that we supported you but not the war, because in that case, you're basically saying that Marine, his buddy, just died for nothing. We're one team. To that end, after all these years later, nearly 2 decades in Afghanistan, 15 plus years in Iraq, where do you stand on where we are with these wars? And this isn't necessarily a political question. I'm just asking you personally, not as Jeremy Staat's running for Congress, as Jeremy Staat, the guy who put a uniform on. How do you see these wars and where they are?
The biggest thing I see is that there's still political wars. I wish that these politicians, when they declare war on somebody, that they would let us fight the way we were trained. If they would let us fight the way we were trained, we would not have any enemies. Literally, when Iran wanted a piece of this a couple weeks ago, I literally said, it'd take less than a weekend if they turned loose the dogs and let us fight the way we were trained. We wouldn't have to put boots on the ground in Iran, and we could decimate their infrastructure in a weekend. But the problem is that you have individuals that are in Congress who've never served, who don't understand that. They've stayed in their little bubble, if you will, who've never served, but they love their little cush seat and they feel like they have that power. But at the end of the day, when I look back, I just think, yeah, thanks for supporting me. I believed in the war at the time, but now I look back and I go, you know what? I don't know. I don't think it was worth it.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I don't know where I sit.
Well, you're torn. I'm torn. It's man, I believed in everything that Mr. Bush said. I believed in what he said. And then when it came out, everything, once again, I hate to bring him up, but everything that happened with Pat, how they lied and deceived his family. And then I go,
that hurt all of us, man. That hurt all of us. And I'm not even comparing it to the hurt and pain that the Tillman family felt, because that's at the top of the list. But just as people put on a uniform, that hurt all of us. None of us came out on top for that. Nobody did. And so to that end, it's hard because diplomacy and politicking and long-term strategy and goals, it's hard to get them all on the same page and solve them all with one swoop of the pen or, one decision that is made by somebody in Washington. I know this for a fact. I was in Iraq in both 2005, 2006, and then again at the closeout in 2011. And I could tell that we hit hull velocity in Iraq at about 2009. That was the best it was ever going to get. It was never going to get any better than that. And we stayed for 2 more years, and things slowly started deteriorating. And as you said, you go back there now, it's probably as bad as it was prior to the invasion. It's just hot garbage. It it was a war we could never win. It was a cause we could never win. But that doesn't for 1 second make me feel like anything I did was unjust or anything I did didn't serve a purpose. And furthermore, it doesn't make me believe that the impacts we made there weren't good. Now, in the macro, the 30,000-foot view, it ends up being sort of a loss, right? You look at it in the big picture and you say, right back where we started, we didn't get anywhere. All we did was waste time, money, lives, and resources, and that's a loss. But not everything is at a 30,000-foot view, especially for people put on a uniform. We don't see the 30,000-foot view. We see the 10-meter view right in front of us. And to that end, the way you conduct yourself in combat, the way you conduct yourself as a person who wears the uniform to your fellow soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors, whatever it may be, that is the measure of how you win, because you can only control the battles that you fight in, nothing else.
Oh, and absolutely, and especially at the time when you're there. Things can, it's easy to say, well, we should have done this or that. Back in 2009, 2010, I thought, man, we're really making progress here. I mean, they've got carnivals. They've got, they're having these, what the hell they call those big wheels that spin, whatever the hell they're called, the Ferris wheels. I'm thinking, wow, they're having their theme parks open. Wow, this is like, we're making a change. And then, like you said, about 2011, we start going, man, more strikes, more suicide bombing, all that. And we're going, okay, well, obviously that, what we've tried to do there isn't going to hold, because of essentially it comes down to the ideology of what they believe. And it's like, once again, like what was it worth? Was it worth all that? I believe it was at that point in time. Yes. But now looking back, I don't know. I mean, it's like things have changed. People have evolved. I think their society has kind of gone backwards. Our society has kind of gone stagnant, if you will, as far as just being so, what's the word I'm looking for? Just being so desensitized to war. I mean, soldiers, Marines, airmen, they're dying weekly over there, and it doesn't even make the news anymore.
Yeah.
Mass shootings here in America don't even make the news anymore.
It's funny. It's funny that you say it doesn't make the news anymore. And this just happened as we sit here recording this. This was in the last 24, 48 hours, where it was a 18-year-old kid was killed in Afghanistan. And the way it was written was that by the city, this kid was obviously from Aurora, Illinois, but the Twitter account of Aurora, Illinois wrote this, and I'm quoting it directly. Tonight, Aurora community mourns the heartbreaking loss of Miguel Villalon, 21. He was one of 2 U.S. service members who passed away today while serving in Afghanistan. Passed away? What a bunch of bullshit. Excuse my French. Like, he was killed in combat. This is where we are, that we are now changing killed in combat to passed away while serving, as if it was somebody who, in the ripe old age of 21, was on his deathbed after serving hundreds of years in the military, and it silently expired. He was killed in combat. Like, this is where we are.
It's a taboo subject that people don't want to talk about anymore. It's the same thing with suicide. Most people didn't realize that, when it says passed away suddenly in the obituary, that usually means 99% of the time it means they committed suicide, but nobody wants to talk about it. And that's one of the reasons I rode the bicycle across the country, is to bring awareness to this. And it's the same thing now. We want to make sure that everything is sugar-coated so it doesn't, bring out the reality of what it is. I mean, that kid gave his life on the combat field, but let's just talk about, like you said, let's just make it real pretty and nice and unoffensive, because, we don't want somebody out there to say, and this has happened, you see it, oh, well, he deserved to die because he's fighting an illegal war. What an idiot. I've seen posts like that before. I've even been told, people have said that to me, and I'm like, dude, are you kidding me right now? Like, I don't control the wars. I'm just a guy answering the call to serve.
It's a strange spot that we're in, to say the least. And that's part of the reason why wholeheartedly I agree with you. We need more veterans in leadership positions in this country, especially as, militarism has become such an everyday fabric of our lives, where we, again, we have made it so easy to say that a soldier passed away instead of being killed in combat, because, the impact isn't there anymore. And to that end, the leaders who are going to take this country the next step forward need to have the experience of leadership. And as I said earlier, I think that, to me, more than anything, is what stands out. It's what I'd run on, whether you have said it or not. It's what you're running on, because you already are a leader in that aspect. And I think that hopefully that shines through to everybody who goes to the polls.
I absolutely hope so as well. Like I said, as much as it it pisses me off that I have to continue to prove myself every day to these non-combat, politicians and these individuals who have never served. It's very frustrating to me. I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. So at the end of the day, you would want a non-combat, a civilian in a political seat over a veteran in times of war. My mind is just boggled by the way where our society is at today. Whereas, like I said, the individuals I'm running against over in the 8th Congressional District right now, I'm the only veteran. I'm the only veteran that's running out of 9 people. And at the end of the day, if I don't get my name recognition in the district up, you know what? I'm probably not going to be the guy that they're going to vote for. And that's very unfortunate. And it's, of course, one of those things. Do I continue to want to fight and put my family and expose my family to this thing again? Or do I just sit back and live my comfortable little life and just go fishing with my boys, and never talk about politics again? But it's very frustrating for me to see that, even as a veteran in this country today, on the political scale, it really doesn't hold that much weight anymore. And that's what's sad.
Well, Jeremy, it certainly has been an amazing story. I mean, from elite college football player to the NFL, to Marine Corps, to Iraq, and now hopefully to a seat in Congress one day. I mean, I don't know that we've had any guests as unique as your story on this podcast, but I've certainly enjoyed talking to you and certainly wish you nothing but the best going forward. But, hold strong to those values that you've learned throughout your career and that you've learned throughout the Marine Corps, and the rest should take care of itself.
Absolutely. God's will be done. And man, I appreciate the time. God bless. Semper Fidelis.
Jeremy Staat, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.